company, we think you need great people. And the beauty of great people is they're all different. When you get them all together in one place, it can generate some crazy cool ideas. Ideas that change things for the better. After all, we're here to be helpful. But real progress doesn't come without hard work. So come make your mark on our community and use your talents to shape the future we're building. Let's do something great together.
Please welcome to the stage Deborah Lee, former CEO, BET. Moderated by Teresita Rashad, Managing Vice President, Head of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, Capital One.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Teresita Rashad, Head of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging with Capital One. And I am so excited to be here today for this conversation to close us out. And so our conversation is going to be around, am I frightened? Am I frightening? Or are you just frightened? And so I'm excited to be here today with Ms. Deborah Lee, who has a wealth of experience, a rich career over 30 plus years, not just navigating corporate America, but leading it as a businesswoman, most recently as the former chairman and president and CEO of BET. She also sits on a number of boards, ranging from Marriott to P&G, to Burberry, to AT&T, and has most recently been appointed to the Warner Media Discovery Board. And so with that background and experience, I think we're going to have a fabulous conversation today. We had a chance to catch up a little bit ago. And one of the things you shared with me, Deborah, is that you're at this time in your life where you are looking at how you can give back and share those pearls of wisdom that you have gleaned over the years. And so I'm excited for this moment to be able to dive into a bit of that today.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I've been a big fan of ELC for many years, almost since they were started. I've spoken before ELC many times, so it's great to be back. It's great to be in that part of my life where I feel like I am sharing and advising. I don't have to do as much as when I was operating a company or managing. So it's a really exciting time of life and makes me realize how much I have learned over the past 30 some years. And it's been a great journey, but I'm happy to be here at this point in life.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, in our conversation today, a couple of outcomes that we're really hoping to get to. And so we talked about this conversation of, am I frightening or are you just frightened? One of the things we wanted to be able to dive into is how do you discover the strategies, the tactics to manage relationships with individuals, with groups, with organizations who might not be ready to accept a Black woman who claims and exercises her full power. Mm-hmm. And so as I think about that, the first question I'd love to dive into is, how did you find your place as a CEO? And how did you really make the role your own? What was that journey like?
Wow. Well, first of all, it was long. I started at BET in 1986. I was the first general counsel, the first in-house lawyer. And over the years, I started doing more and more business things. I oversaw the construction of our first production facility. I ran our magazine group, our publishing group, and I just started getting a feel for what business was like. And I found out I loved it. And I was doing business strategy. And in 1995, I was appointed as Chief Operating Officer, which was a new position. All of a sudden I was the boss to my peers, which made it a little awkward and difficult. And so it took me a while to find my space and to really be comfortable with the way I manage. And that was important to me. I love management. Bob Johnson was the CEO before me. He had his own style. I didn't want to step into the role and manage like him. I figured as a woman, I could have my own style, and I just had to figure out what it was. And so the reason I say it was long is because I was COO for 10 years, which is way too long for someone to be in that role. It's kind of like you're in training for CEO. And, most people do it for 3 or 4 years. I did it for 10. And then I was CEO for 13 years. And so during my time as COO, I realized that I did have a different style. I liked consensus building. I liked hearing people's opinions. At first, I was too much like a judge, maybe because of my legal training, and I wanted to hear everyone's opinion. I wanted to go away and think about it for a while and then come back and make a decision. You don't have that time in the business world. You really don't. And you don't have full information for any decision. You have to trust your instinct. You have to make decisions on the information you have, and everyone's not going to be happy. So a pure consensus building approach is not going to work. And as a CEO or COO, you have to get used to that. You have to know when you leave that room and you've made a decision, there are going to be some people that are not happy. What you want to happen is for them to jump in and say, okay, I didn't get my way, but this is the decision that was made, and fully support that. And over time, I built my own team. I hired people that were loyal to me and were invested in my success. And I was able to do that, to have people, managers and executive vice presidents that I know wanted to move in the same direction I did. So little by little, I developed my own voice. I developed my own values. We went through a brand strategy program at BET for about 18 months, where we spent a lot of time talking about individual values and why we come to work and how we want to show up. And that really helped us develop a brand for BET, which was respect, reflect, and elevate. And once we came up with those words, we knew what we wanted to do as a team and as a company. So investing the time, sitting back, thinking about what you want your company to stand for and what the brand should be is really important. And that helped me a lot in terms of developing my own management skills.
Was there anything that surprised you as you think about, you mentioned that you were in the COO role, really preparing for a while. When you got into the CEO role, was there anything that surprised you, good, bad, or indifferent?
Well, the first surprise I had after I took over the CEO position was I had no one to blame anymore. There wasn't a higher up who I could say, well, I tried and this person didn't want to do it. It was all me. So I had to take full responsibility for all decisions. And it gave me more confidence in my decision-making ability, because I was like, well, if I'm going to get the credit and the blame, I might as well make my own decisions. So I still listened to executives, but I knew deep down inside I had to really figure out what I wanted to do. One of the first major dilemmas I had was when Rosa Parks passed away. And some of our competitors at the time, because we were at a point where we did have competitors, were going to air the funeral And so my team was saying, well, are we going to air the funeral and blah, blah, blah. And I realized I didn't really have anyone to talk to anymore. Bob Johnson had left. But I sat in the back of a car on the way to the airport, and I was almost like talking to myself. I was like, well, what do you think, Deborah? Should we do it this way? And that's when I realized, okay, I'm in this for real. And I made the decision not to air the funeral. One, because I know Black funerals can last a long time. It's hard to air commercials in the middle of Black funerals. And, my advertising team didn't want to lose revenue. And so we got a little criticism for that. But what I did instead, and we came to this decision as a group, was to put the funeral on Centric, which was our second network at the time, and didn't have as much advertising, and we wouldn't lose as much revenue. And then eventually we moved it to our online, BET.com. But that was a hard decision because, running BET especially, you feel like you're representing and holding it down for the Black community. So you don't want to make the wrong decisions, and you don't want too much criticism. I mean, you have to have that thick skin and be used to some criticism. But, we didn't get very much out of that decision because we could put at the bottom of the screen, if you want to see the funeral, go to Centric. And that still to this day feels like the right decisions. But I have a lot of examples of decisions, some that didn't go the right way, some that did go the right way, some that I'm proud of. It's the nature of the beast. As CEO, you take the flak one way or another, good and bad.
Yeah, I can imagine when you're making that shift and you're looking around like, okay, well, who am I going to run these decisions by? Like, you have that moment, to your point, where you realize that it's you.
Right. And I must say, so people don't get confused, everyone has a boss. So it's not that I didn't have a boss. All of a sudden, my boss was the CEO of Viacom, and his boss was the board of Viacom. So you always have a boss. So I still had to answer up. It just so happened that that person wasn't as involved in running BET day to day. I had to be ready to answer questions and give back feedback on how things went, but it wasn't like they were telling me what to do. That was something that we had negotiated when we sold BET, that in terms of programming, they would let BET run the show, the executive team.
Mm-hmm. So as our session title suggests, there's a difference, right, between being frightening and someone being frightened. Or maybe even a better way to say that is being intimidating and someone being intimidated. So as you think about what it means as an intelligent Black woman, businesswoman, leading businesses in a position of power, I can imagine you've undoubtedly encountered some of that and knows, what this feels like. Tell us about a time someone either explicitly or they implied that you were intimidating or too much. What do you think was really happening and how did you respond?
Well, that's a great question. I think that in general, Black women have a lot to overcome in terms of how we're perceived, in terms of how we're received, in terms of, labels that are attached to us. And we deal with that every day. And it doesn't necessarily apply to white men. And I've seen that distinction very clearly. I've been in rooms where white men cursed a lot and people just accepted that as their personality, very high ranking men who just, cursed a lot. And no one said, oh my God, they're scary, or oh my God, they're intimidating. It was just accepted. I think as a woman, if you do that, you have the potential of being labeled as frightening. I remember one time one of my senior executives made me really mad. He said something about people from the South, and I personally am from the South, so I took it personally, and I cursed at him. It's probably the first and last time I cursed at work, and he wrote me up. And this was like a 6'3" Black man. And he said the fact that I used a curse word um, was intimidating to him. And I think he was just trying to save his job because he knew how mad I was. So he used the fact that I was a woman and I was a Black woman to label me in a certain way just because I had pretty much lost control of my emotions and used the curse word because it's not something I normally do at work. So that taught me a lesson. Never lose your temper because you never know who's on the other side of that and how they will use that to put you in a box or to criticize you or to write you up for HR. Another time, it was in a board situation where I was told I talked too much, and which really surprised me because I'm not that person that just talks to hear myself talk. For years in board meetings, I probably didn't say one or two things aboard, but as I became older and had more experience, I think I have more to share. And at this particular board, I still wouldn't say I talk that much. So I was shocked again, and I listened to other people in that boardroom who talked much more than me, but it was accepted. I don't know if it was because what they were saying was more acceptable and because I was challenging some of the assumptions of the company and the way they were handling race in a very tough time, because we have gone through a tough time dealing with race for the past 2 or 3 years. This person decided to try to shut me down, and I wouldn't let that happen. So I think women in particular, and Black women even more in particular, need to figure out who they are, how they want to be perceived, and I would say just be yourself. And if you're in an environment where you can't be yourself, that's a problem. And you can pick your words carefully. You can think about what you're going to say, but usually we know when it's time to take a hard line. And I've been in environments too much where I've walked out of a meeting and thought for a day afterwards, oh, I wish I had said so and so. I wish I had challenged that person on what they said. And I don't do that anymore. The thoughts come to me quicker, again, with more experience. And, if someone doesn't want that entire part of me, I'm not a good fit for them or what they're trying to accomplish. But I love the title of this conversation because that is something that we have to deal with, whether it's our hair, whether it's, the way we dress. We shouldn't have to change things about ourselves to be more acceptable to others. It's just not the way it should be. And I think we need to talk more about these issues and feel comfortable walking into a room with others and expressing our views and being our true selves.
That is powerful. Think about what you shared around like how your response and really kind of how fast you tolerate or not tolerate that has evolved over time as you have grown. As you think about that and you think about where you are now in this stage, imagine if you were able to go back and give yourself at an earlier stage that advice. What advice would you give yourself knowing now how you have evolved in your response to these different types of situations?
Well, I think the advice I would give myself is to use my voice more. People talk about finding our voice. I think we all know our voice. We know how we feel. We know what our values are. We know when we've been pushed beyond the line. I think we have to use our voices more because, we may be afraid or intimidated ourselves because of the environment. And, we may be unsure about how it will be received. But I think there's a way to use your voice, to not be overly emotional, to not be angry, even if you are angry, not to show it, and to use your voice in a productive way. So I think I would advise my younger self to do that sooner, and not because and not be quiet for too long, because there's a reason we are in these rooms. And if you don't use your voice, you're missing out on your purpose and your reason for being in the room. And in the end, I think most people want to hear from us and want to hear, realize that diversity is important. And unless you hear everyone's feelings on the issue, you're not going to get to the best result. And I think that's the key. We want to all get to the best results. So I wouldn't overthink it.
I love that. You don't have to find your voice. You know your voice.
Right.
It's a matter of using it. That's really powerful. There's this a quote that I was just looking at by James Baldwin, and it says, "The place in which I fit will not exist until I make it." And I hear a bit of that in what you're saying here around, there's a reason that you are in the room.
Right.
And so your voice is needed. Don't be afraid to use that. And maybe when you are afraid, it's that signal to you that, I'm afraid, signal, I actually need to speak.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would say two things. One, I didn't grow up in the corporate environment at Viacom. I grew up at BET. So when Viacom acquired BET, I was already COO. And I was treated by others as the heir apparent. So everyone thought that I would be CEO one day. So I didn't have to take those smaller steps. I came in at a higher level. So I think that gave me some type of immediate credibility. I'm already running the division. It's just a matter of how much they respect the division and how I operate with the other division heads at Viacom. And then the other thing I was going to say is that when you're in these rooms, a lot of times we're the only ones. We're the only Black woman. In a lot of rooms I'm in, I'm the only Black person. So it's not just I'm the only Black woman. I could be the first Black person on the board. I could be the first woman on the board. I always like to tell a story when I went on the Revlon board. I think I was the second woman. Martha Stewart was on the board before me, but she went to prison and I replaced her, which was an interesting way to come onto a board. But I used to go to board meetings and you'd have 10 white men sitting around discussing lipstick colors. And I thought that was the strangest thing. If you don't think about who your consumers are or who your viewers are, or, having some representation of that group on your board, you're already in a losing position. And over time, I think when I stepped off the Revlon board, they had at least 50% women. So they moved in the right direction. But, it's critical if you're trying to appeal to a certain group or a consumer, that you have people on your board that are part of that group. And I'm glad more companies are beginning to realize that.
So let's keep going down this path of being, the first, maybe the only, maybe the first and the only, or maybe one of few. So we talked a bit about how others, or we've touched on earlier in the day, how others' perceptions can impact how we view ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way, the feedback we receive from others, whether they be our mentors or our supervisors or peers, they could also impact how we view ourselves and how we show up at work. And so the question I have for you is, what role did feedback play in helping you understand that sometimes the "you're too much" comments are more about other people's perceptions and not about you?
Right. Well, I think if we're talking about corporate environments, it's important to have people that you can have honest conversations with about how you are perceived. Everyone says it's important to have mentors, and mentors can give you advice. I heard recently at a conference that I do every year, someone said, but you really need sponsors. You need someone who are going to be in the room when you're not there to fight for you, not just give you advice. So I think feedback is important, but you also have to keep in mind that feedback is, affected by the people that are giving it and what they need. And, it may be the time when they're looking for people to promote and they know you're not going to be one of them. So they want to start giving you, a sign that something's wrong with your work. And there may not be anything wrong with your work, but it's their way of giving you that signal that you're not part of that group. So I think you should be wary of it sometimes. But I think, you should heed the advice and listen to it. Right now having a coach is so popular. And sometimes I know when I was at BET at one point, I thought everyone on my senior management team had a coach. But coaches can be helpful in that regard, to give you true feedback, be a good ear for you. Doing 360 evaluations can be helpful. Again, there may be some politics involved in that or some things that aren't really true. But you should read it carefully and think about how you're perceived and what things you want to change. Again, you may not want to change everything that people have used to criticize you. And maybe you do want to talk too much. Maybe that's just part of who you are, or there are a lot of issues right now, and you want to be part of the solution. So I think feedback is good. I think if you don't get feedback, you should ask for it on a regular basis, whether that's once every 6 months or once a year. I don't think you want to go long periods of time without getting feedback, especially from your manager. And I think you should use it to improve the way you show up, but also to get a feel for, how you're fitting in the company and whether you're part of that long tenure track. Because sometimes it may be time to move on. And I know I hear that the younger generation is better at doing that. But that is always a possibility if things aren't working out.
Yeah, it makes me think my grandmother had a saying. She would say, Teresita, sometimes you need to eat the meat and spit out the bones.
Oh,
And so it makes me think about within this, like, how do you discern when between helpful feedback and unhelpful feedback when you're in that process of taking in all of the different opinions and perspectives? How have you done that?
well, I think it's important to have feedback from more than one person. Like I said, 360 evaluations where you get feedback from your peers are really good. When you're a manager and you get feedback from those people that report to you, you might not like it, but it may be helpful. So I think the more feedback you have, the better you are at dissecting what's real and what's not. So I think that's a good way to do it. I also, again, would point to having a executive coach. Those are very helpful. There was a time when especially CEOs didn't want to admit they had an executive coach. But a friend of mine told me a while ago that she was interviewing for a position at a company, and the CEO asked that she interview with his executive coach. So I thought that was a great sign that even CEOs admit that they need some help. I mean, none of us come to this naturally, and I didn't go to business school, but I'm not sure they teach such a great job of it there. I've learned it on the job. But management is really a skill, and you have to learn to manage people who are not like you, who have different priorities than you have, and still bring important things to the table and could be very helpful to the company. So I think it is important to do what your grandmother suggested, and not throw it all out, but really discern what's important and what's not.
So we have some questions coming through from the audience, and I love that. Please keep them coming. One of the questions is, how do you respond if you are directly called angry? I feel that is the go-to when we stand in our inner authority and power. How do you respond to that?
Well, I guess the first advice I would give is not to respond in an angry way. That doesn't help the situation. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard, depending on what has been said and how it was said and how fair you think it was. So I would take some time to think about your response, figure out who you want to respond to. Do you want to respond to the person that gave you that feedback, or someone else that may be more helpful? So I think the thing to do is to think about it in a responsible, unemotional way, and figure out how you want to handle it. I was dealing with one issue, and a fellow board member sent me a text, and I had given a little speech on an issue. And she said to me, "Grace and wisdom, they look good on you." And I appreciated that feedback because she knew some of the issues I was dealing with. And instead of, jamming those issues in their face, I took a different approach and still made my point. But for her to say it came through as grace and wisdom really meant a lot to me. And you have to think about that sometimes. And whether it's grace or whether it's, your experience, you have to figure out how you want to share that with others, and how you react if they don't appreciate you sharing it with them.
That's good. Grace and wisdom, they look good on you. I'm
Yeah.
writing that one down myself. Another question that we have is really around executive presence. One of the things you shared a little bit earlier was around using your voice. Over time, how did you develop your own executive presence, and what advice would you share with the audience?
Well, I think, and you and I talked a little bit about this before, is discovering whether you're an introvert or extrovert. I think that's really important, and there are all kind of psychological tests you can take at work. But this one book, Quiet, which I only read the first chapter, but I learned a lot from the first chapter. I learned that I was an introvert. And I knew I was shy as a kid, but I didn't know what an introvert was. And so when I took over as COO at BET, it was tough for me to speak in front of the company, to speak in front of analysts. My voice actually quivered sometimes. And I just had to realize that was not my strong suit. That didn't mean I wasn't a good leader. It didn't mean I wasn't a good manager. It meant that I would get nervous when I had to speak in front of a big group. So I took some coaching lessons on public speaking. But what really helped me was just experience, doing it over and over again until I could walk out on the BET Award stage once a year and talk to 10 million people at home, and still be a little bit nervous, but have control of my voice and my presence. I was always better at smaller groups. So I didn't have a problem with my senior team or talking about the company in smaller groups. I just had to get used to being the main course at a dinner where I was the main speaker. That always made me nervous. So I would say to people, don't give up. Keep practicing, because that's what it takes. And realize, and I think the book Quiet pointed this out, that just because you're a good actor or just because you're good on your feet or you're a performer doesn't mean that you're superior to people that don't have that particular talent. And I think, as a parent, I can say this: when our kids are younger, the kid that can go out there and be a comedian or play the main role in a play gets all the applause, but they shouldn't be at the expense of the other kids who may not want to get up there on stage, because that shy kid may end up being a better leader or a better business person or whatever. So I think it's, understanding your strengths and weaknesses, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your team. How at senior team meetings you may have to pull someone out a little bit more because they're not the one talking all the time. How to keep quiet the ones that are talking all the time, because you want to hear from everybody. And you want to give everyone the opportunity to express their views. And having people in the room who want to take over and want to be the star is not a good way to run a company. So I think there are various things you can do, but the first is to find out what your strengths and weaknesses are, and to deal with that.
Thank you for that. Another question that has come through talks about more Black presence on boards. And we would love to hear more about the beginning of starting the Monarchs Collective.
Sure, I'd be glad to talk about it. The Monarchs Collective is a company I started after George Floyd's murder. And I, like a lot of other people, are trying to figure out, how do you give back? How can you make a difference? How do I make an impact? And so many companies came forward quickly and gave $10 million to this social justice organization or that social justice organization or to Black Lives Matter. And younger people said, well, if you believe in Black Lives Matter, why aren't there any Black people on your board? Why are there no women on your board? And all of a sudden, companies were embarrassed because they were trying to, stand up for racial equality. And they realized that when people put up the Facebook pictures of who's on their board or who's on their senior team, it didn't look good for them. Their C-suites might be all white men or maybe one white woman. So my partner and I decided to start Monarchs Collective and focus intensely on getting Black people on boards. Not multicultural, not just let's get some Black people on boards, because that's what's going to make a difference. And it will create Black wealth. And as a Black community, we don't talk enough about Black wealth and how important it is. And I couldn't get out of my head the image of George Floyd on the ground with this police officer's knee on his neck, like he was not even a human being. And I thought to myself, we have to create more Black wealth to counteract these, images of us. And so that's why I started Monarchs Collective. And it's really turned out to be a personal passion for me. I've been on boards for over 20 years. And I've always enjoyed it. I like learning about new companies. I like learning how other people manage. I like advising CEOs. And I knew that was going to be an important part of my life when I stepped down from BET, and it has been. And I've been intentional about the boards I've accepted, and I wanted to share that expertise with others. So it's been a great year. We had our first board masterclass where we had 20 Black women. And for 4 weeks, for 2 hours a week, we taught them about how to get on a board and how to present yourself when you're at a board and what kind of boards do you want to be on. And it was just so powerful and so meaningful to me that I could help Black women even start thinking about being on a board, because for so long it was a hidden secret from us, that boards existed or that you could create wealth by being on a board. So I know ELC has done a lot with board service also, and I commend the organization for doing that. But that's what made me start Monarch Collective, to really allow myself to share my knowledge with others. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. You'd think after 2 years of doing this that I would get through a whole session without that happening. Thank you for sharing that with us. There was something you said that sparked another question for me. You talked about sometimes it's like the secret of how do you get to a board, and it made me think about the journey you went on, being in the COO role for 10 years, and then CEO is 13 years. And now the work that you're doing around board service, were the skill sets different as you made those shifts, or were the skills the same? I'm reminded of the book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I'm wondering how that might have shifted as you were on that journey.
Yeah, well, I've been through a lot of shifts in skill sets, in experience, in what's needed for particular boards or working at a company. The first shift I had was from being general counsel to being a COO. And I had to learn to take off my legal hat, because that was a different set of skills. And as I said before, if I spend as much time researching issues and trying to put all the research together and make a decision, that just didn't work when you're a business person. So I had to make decisions quicker, and I had to deal with people in a different kind of way. You don't manage a lot of people if you're general counsel. Those are usually smaller staffs. So I had to learn how to manage a larger group of people. When I went from COO to CEO, all of a sudden people were asking me for a vision. What's your vision? Well, when you're COO, no one asks you for a vision. All you do is carry out the vision of the CEO. And if you do a good job at that, that's great. But no one says, well, Deborah, what do you think? And then all of a sudden, when I was a CEO, people started saying, well, Deborah, what do you think? What's your vision? Why are you running this company? And especially people that work for me, when they want to throw me off, they're like, well, yeah, I don't know what to do because I don't know your vision. And a lot of time that was a bunch of BS. But anyway, so I took a while. I developed a vision. I came up with a brand strategy. I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. I got a book here and it says exactly what we're going to do. And so it started working. But the biggest difference is between being in management and serving on a board. When you're on a board, you are not managing the company. And for ex-CEOs like me, you have to remind yourself of that. And they want you to focus on strategy and not micromanage the company. And again, as a CEO, ex-CEO, that's hard to do sometimes. So every now and then I had to force myself to pull myself up and say, okay, Deborah, you're not running this company. You're just on the board. So you can make suggestions, but you can't, really affect the day-to-day operations. So there is a difference. There are different skill sets, and people need to be aware of that. And if you don't have the skill set, work on the skill set in order to do it. But ex-CEOs love being on boards because they love keeping their hands in the mix. And I'm very excited about going on the Discovery Warner Media Board, because it feels like going 360 degrees. I started in cable, so this is kind of getting me back in cable. But it's a very different perspective I will see from being on the board.
Thank you. Well, we have just a few minutes remaining, and so I'm going to take one more question from the chat, and hopefully we're able to get one more in there as well. So the question that's coming in from the chat, you shared a little bit earlier around challenges working with white men and how you've navigated that. This question is a little bit of a shift on that, and it is, can you talk about working with white women and working with them through that lens of privilege, and maybe even having white women push up against you in leadership, and how you've navigated that?
Wow, that's a great question. I would say, for the most part, um, I have seen and hope that white women see me as allies. Someone asked me once a long time ago, was in corporate America, was it more difficult to be Black or more difficult to be a woman? At the time, I said it was more difficult to be Black. After serving in corporate America longer, I would say now it's more difficult to be a woman because women are still not seen as equals in the boardroom or in corporate America. There are more of them, thank goodness, but there's still not enough. The numbers are still dismal when you look at the number of female CEOs in the Fortune 500 or whatever. And so I think we still face similar challenges. And as a Black woman, you're facing double challenges because you got to deal with both. And so, women that I've worked next to, if they're white women, I see them as allies. A lot of times they respond in a similar way, and we can kind of give each other the side eye if something unusual or expected happens with the men in a room. But sometimes they're your competitors, and you have to be aware of that. Whether it's for promotion or whether it's for more resources or whether it's for attention. And I have had instances where white women have seen me as a threat. Oh, well, Deborah gets that because she's a Black woman. And that's not usually the case. And some of that comes from their own insecurities. But I think, in the situations I've enjoyed the most, we've been able to be allies. But I think you just have to really know who you're dealing with and know what their perspective is, and try to be of help to each other if that's possible. Because you both have so many challenges and darts coming at you, that it's helpful when you can work together.
Thank you for that. We're in our final moments of our time together, so I just want to say thank you. It has been a pure delight being able to learn from you and hear more of your story and your wisdom and the nuggets that you shared. There are three things that, many more, but three that are standing out for me in this moment that I'd like to close us out with. One of the things you said that stuck with me is that grace and wisdom look good on you. I want to share that with our audience today and proclaim that over our audience, that grace and wisdom looks good on you. You talked about you don't need to find your voice, but that push for us to use our voice and to remember that we're in the room for a reason. So I'd like to re-emphasize that piece of it. And then there was another part that you talked about with the presence and the fact that over time, the skills that you've used have shifted and changed. Mm-hmm. But there's something that stood out to me, Deborah, as you were sharing your story, is that there always seemed to be this groundedness around what is it that I'm trying to achieve? Where am I trying to go? What am I trying to do? And how am I going to have that impact and leading from that space? And so I just want to say thank you for all the pearls and the wisdom that you've left us with today. And so excited to see more and hear more from the Monarch Collective, from all the work that you're doing. And I am in a deep space of gratitude. My cup is full.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been terrific. I'm glad we've been in conversation. Sorry we can't see the reaction of the viewers, but this has been great. So thank you very much.